Good morning. Good morning to those dialing in from Canada, and good afternoon to our speakers and those joining us from Europe and from the Netherlands. My name is Monica Ambellas-Carrere, Trade Commissioner to the Netherlands, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Gateway to Europe webinar. We received a tremendous amount of interest in this event, over 300 registrations, and I think almost 100 people are currently dialed into the webinar this morning. This speaks to the importance of trade diversification, as well as the increasing interest by Canadian companies in exporting to the Netherlands and to Europe. This is the first of what we hope will be numerous webinars on this topic and on similar topics that we hope to host throughout this year. Presenting today, we have Adam Barbalet, Senior Trade Commissioner at the Embassy of Canada to the Netherlands. He'll be followed by our co-host and distribution expert, Justin Groen, Senior Manager of Business Development at the Holland International Distribution Council. We have Eric De Bie, Global Trade, Customs and VAT Attorney at Greenberg Traurig. Eric will discuss duties and VAT and how to manage them. And joining us online from Canada, we have Stephanie Kurana, President at Netchem Inc., who can speak firsthand of her experience exporting to the Netherlands and how she used Netherlands as a gateway to Europe. With that, again, welcome to the webinar, and I would like to pass it to my colleague Adam to get us started.
Thanks very much, Monica. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. It's a pleasure to see so many Canadian companies interested in exporting to Europe, and specifically to the Netherlands. As Monica said, I'm Adam Barbalet, the Senior Trade Commissioner at the Embassy here in The Hague, and I'm delighted to open today's session, Gateway to Europe. Let me begin very briefly by who we are and what we do. The Trade Commissioner's service exists for one simple reason: to help Canadian companies succeed internationally by helping you understand markets, by connecting you to credible local partners and customers, by troubleshooting barriers when they arise, and by advocating for Canadian commercial interests on the ground. We work in over 160 cities worldwide, and our job is quite simply to shorten the distance between Canadian ambition and global opportunity. Today's session is about one of the most important of those gateways, the Netherlands. I'm going to frame that importance with a short story. Last December, Canada's ambassador to Poland bought cranberries for her Christmas meal. She picked the cranberries up in a local Warsaw grocery shop, although the cranberries themselves were packaged here in the Netherlands. When she got home, she discovered the cranberries weren't Canadian at all. They were grown in the United States, and as she put it, this purchase broke my heart. That small moment captures something much bigger. You've likely heard of the Rotterdam effect. It's often described as a statistical quirk. Trade flows that appear Dutch on paper, even though the goods are ultimately destined for somewhere else in Europe. Because Rotterdam is one of the world's largest logistics hubs, the Netherlands shows up disproportionately in trade statistics. But look, that framing misses the point. The Rotterdam effect isn't just about numbers, it's about decisions. The Dutch didn't grow those cranberries, just as they don't grow cacao. But the Netherlands is the world's largest exporter of cocoa products. They're the third largest exporter of avocados after Mexico and Peru. What the Dutch do is import, process, package, finance, insure, certify, store, and re-export. And in doing so, they decide what Europe buys. If a Dutch importer chooses Canadian cranberries rather than American ones, the result isn't just a different Christmas dinner, it's a Canadian product on shelves in Warsaw and across Europe. Influence travels through supply chains, and the Netherlands is where many of those supply chains are shaped. That's why we describe the Netherlands not simply as a market, but as a market that shapes other markets. It's a gateway that gives Canadian companies real leverage across Europe. This leverage matters even more in a world focused on economic resilience and trade diversification. The Netherlands is a hub not only for food and consumer goods, but for energy, critical raw materials, advanced manufacturing, and high-value services. What moves through Dutch ports warehouses, data centers, and policy networks often goes on to shape sourcing decisions far beyond Dutch borders. And it's not just logistics. From The Hague, the Netherlands also projects policy influence across Europe, through Brussels, through international organizations, and through an unusually dense ecosystem of legal, regulatory, and standard-setting bodies. When Canada engages effectively in the Netherlands, we're often engaging upstream, where rules, preferences, and commercial norms are still being formed. That said, I want to be very clear about one thing. The Netherlands is not just a conduit. It's an important market in its own right. With one of the highest GDPs per capita in Europe, the Netherlands is a sophisticated, demanding, and well-capitalized buyer of Canadian goods and services. Dutch companies are global leaders in logistics, agri-food, clean tech, life sciences, defense, and digital solutions. They value reliability, sustainability, and long-term partnerships, and Canada's reputation aligns extremely well with those priorities. There's also a deeper context here. The Netherlands is the only country Canada has ever liberated. And that history still matters. It translates today into a high level of trust, political goodwill, and receptivity to Canadian partners. We see it in parliamentary debates, in regulatory cooperation, and increasingly in concrete initiatives from defense industrial cooperation to emerging critical mineral corridors. So when we talk about the Netherlands as a gateway, we're not talking about bypassing it. We're talking about starting here, anchoring here, and then scaling outwards. That's exactly what today's session is designed to help you do. In a moment, I'll hand things over to our colleague Justin from HIDC, the Dutch organization responsible for supporting international companies navigating the Netherlands' logistical and distribution ecosystem. Before I do, let me leave you with this thought. In practice, Europe isn't a single market. It's a network. And the Netherlands is one of the most powerful nodes in that network. For Canadian companies prepared to think strategically about entry points, partnerships, and supply chains, the Netherlands is not just a door to Europe. It's a lever. Thank you very much. And with that, I'm pleased to hand you over to Justin, our representative from HIDC.
Thank you very much, Adam. Well, thank you all for attending today in such big numbers. It really says a lot about the urgency that Canadian companies feel in diversifying their sales markets further than the North American continent. So it's very good, I think, for you and for us as well to see how we can help you set up shop here in the Netherlands or in Europe, but via the Netherlands. My name is Justin Groen. I'm working with the Holland International Distribution Council as a senior manager of business development, and I'm focusing on the North American continent, so also on Canada. First, let me do a little introduction about what we do at the HIDC. So we are a private non-profit association representing more than 300 companies and organizations in the Dutch logistics industry. We were founded in 1987, so we're almost 40 years of age, and funded by membership fees and the Dutch government. All our services are free of charge and fully confidential, helping Canadian companies set up shop here in Europe, and we do that with our network because we are a partner in the Invest in Holland network led by the NFVA, the Netherlands Foreign Investment Agency, and all the regional development agencies, working together to roll out the orange carpet and help, in this case, Canadian companies to set up and to make things as easy as possible and help them every step along the way. So the mission of the HIDC is to promote the Netherlands as the ideal hub for European supply chain activities, support international companies in setting up or restructuring their logistics operations in or via the Netherlands. And we do that by matchmaking services to our members. So if you look at our members, you can divide them into 4 different groups. So the first group is the logistic service providers, the biggest group, from the biggest ones on earth until the smaller ones and everyone in between. So you can see it on the screen here, DHL, UPS, Civil Logistics, all part of our network, but also smaller ones and small medium enterprises in that. The second group is the facilitators, such as Greenberg Traurig, where Eric is also speaking here today. But you have to think about tax attorneys, law firms, fiscal representatives, customs agencies, logistics, real estate companies, advisory companies, warehouse automations, robotics companies, and every company that supplies or helps with the Dutch logistics industry. We've got the logistics infrastructure, for example, the Port of Rotterdam, Schiphol, Air France, KLM. They're also one of our founding members. And last but not least, the regions, what I just said as well, the network, regional development agencies, but also other instances here in the Netherlands, such as ATN, Air Cargo Netherlands, and VNX, who help with regulatory issues. So our services, as I said already, free of charge and fully confidential. I can't stress that enough because I know that a lot of companies can't grasp that idea that we do it all for free, but we really just want you to come to the Netherlands and set up shop here and contribute to the economy. So we do that by giving advice on European supply chain structures and assistance in definition of logistics requirements. We can help companies organize fact-finding trips. So if you pinpointed a couple of companies that you possibly want to do business with, we can help you set up meetings with those companies and get face-to-face meetings and really get a feeling and a grasp of who you potentially are going to do business with. We do this always on a neutral basis, so we don't have favorites or whatever. We really look at your needs. We do an intake, we look at your needs and match you to the best possible companies in our member organization. And of course, give you advice every step along the way in doing that. So as part of the Invest in Holland network, we focus on high-value companies to attract meaningful value to the Dutch economy. So meaning value-added services, post manufacturing, reverse logistics, to name a few. Supply chain operations for companies that operate in high-value sectors. You can see it on the right-hand side of the screen. So agri-food, chemicals, renewable energy, high-tech systems, materials, life sciences and health, and IT. Those are, per definition, high-value sectors. And the business operation of companies that offer innovative and sustainable solutions to the Dutch logistics industry. That having said, at HIDC, we are a private non-profit organization, so we also have our own members we have to take care of, meaning that we will help all companies. So if you have a company that doesn't fit this schedule, we will still be able to help you set up shop here in the Netherlands and storm the European markets. So, storming, entering European markets, it's all the same. We've got like 450 million consumers, and we are therefore the second largest consumer market in the world. But we are also a single market. So with the single currency, the euro, we've got free movements of goods, services, capital, and people. So once you're in the EU, you can freely roam the whole European Union. We've got stable economic and political environment with good established legal and regulatory frameworks. In other words, there are no surprises where your biggest trading partner at the moment might be a little bit different at the moment. I hope that changes quickly. We are leaders in innovation and technology with robust research and development ecosystems, which can also add a lot of value to your company, and your company can add a lot of value to those ecosystems as well. So really strengthen each other and help each other within the whole industry. So there are some things to consider when you enter the European market. Think about market insights, the size of your market, the demand for your products, cultural differences. I mean, Europe isn't a country, it's 27 different member states who all have their own cultures and their own behaviors. So really something to keep into account. We're not the same, but we work together. Regulatory compliance, so taxes, import and exporting rules, product safety, labor laws. A lot of things are even throughout the union, but country-wise there are always a lot of rules that can differ from each other. You have to define a good market entry strategy. So what business model are you going to use? What pricing? How are you going to approach your distribution and sales channels? Very important to keep into account. I will go into that a little bit later as well. And of course, logistics and operations, the life vein of every economy. So the production and warehousing locations, where will you settle down? Will you do it yourself in an own operation, or will you use a 3PL or a warehousing partner? What kind of inventory levels do you need? Which delivery systems, etc., etc. So a lot of factors, and so here are a couple of other decisive factors. So where will your primary production be? Far East, US, Europe, Eastern Europe, Canada maybe. And then will you nearshore and add value to the products here in the Netherlands, for example, as Adam gave an example of with the cranberries. You have to know the location of your key markets, where will you sell your goods, because Europe is big and full of cultural differences, so maybe your goods will do it very nice in the western part, but not in the southern part, for example. Think about your sales channels. Are you going to use distributors? Are you going to use B2B channels, B2C, or do you make a mix of all those channels? The required lead time to market, is it healthcare? Is it something in life sciences and health, and do you need to have it on market in with the customer in 12 hours? Or is it like a garden furniture that can also take 2 weeks before it arrives to the end customer? Think about that. Do you arrange it, your inventory centrally or decentrally? Your supply chain planning will be central or decentral. Trade and compliance, there's a lot of things to keep into account. And we can, of course, help you with everything along the way. So, a couple of strategies. This is also what I just tried to mention or go more into depth in. So for exporters, there are a lot of advantages of keeping stock in the EU. So having EU presence, you compete on level playing field. You've got the same rules and regulations as EU companies. So yeah, it's very fair. There's shorter lead times and order cycle times because you're closer to the market. You don't have to import all your goods from Canada all the time. Lower overall logistics costs because it's already here. Open up new sales channels. On the right-hand side, we'll go into that after I pinpointed all these dots. And you've got exempt of paying import VAT. We've got a VAT deferment scheme here in the Netherlands, and we'll go into that deeper a little bit later as well. And for EU customers, it's great to be able to buy locally. That's a trend at the moment. One invoice covering all the products, transportation, and all the other charges. Reduced inventory levels, so no need to import 1 container at a time, but maybe just do 2 pallets per week because you are near your customers, giving you a competitive edge as well. And there's no need to deal with customs clearances because you already customs cleared all your goods here in Europe. So when you look at the image, it's an example of how you are able to set up your supply chain. So you can have a regional or a European distribution center in the Netherlands, for example, and then say, okay, for the Nordics and for the UK, I will use a distributor, just send the goods there and they arrange everything. But we'll send directly to the consumers in the radius that you just see, because this is the south of France, the south of Germany, etc. You can reach that within 1 to 2 business days from the Netherlands. Use retail shops in the southern parts of the continent, and for example, use Amazon for the Eastern European part. And the possibilities are countless. So again, we can help you set this up and determine what works best for you along the way. Well, the difference between outsourced and in-house, yeah, it speaks for itself. If you do it yourself, you have to have the economy of scale, so volumes to fill your warehouse and have the constant flows. And you have more control of your own supply chains. But if you outsource this, you won't need any capital investments and a way shorter time to start up. You can, for example, use a fiscal representative here who can apply for a VAT number on your behalf, apply for the Article 23 deferment scheme, ship your goods to a 3PL who will store your goods and then distribute it throughout Europe. And it's really that simple if you just want to start selling your goods here in the Netherlands. You've got more flexibility in space and manpower, lower logistics costs because you're not bound to anything. And of course, the 3PL has a lot of experience and knowledge because they're the experts. So they can help you along the way, have good contracts with integrators, and you can concentrate on your core business, which I would think is the most important thing for a company. So the upcoming slides I will go through even more quickly than I've been through these ones, because Erik is going to go more into depth on this on these slides or these subjects. So we've got the customs union, so free movement of goods across all borders in Europe. There are some national differences in the customs clearance procedures, in the VAT, the amount of VAT, and product-specific requirements. One of the reasons that we would always say to use Article 23 in the Netherlands because you can apply it to the whole of Europe. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We also have more than 45 trade agreements, such as CETA, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, which reduces barriers and simplifies trade. About 98% of all EU-Canada tariffs are removed, but there are some hooks on that, but Erik will explain that a little bit later as well. It's easy for Canadian investors to operate in the EU. You can bid on EU and Dutch governmental contracts, what I think is a huge plus. And of course, we facilitate the ease of doing business here, arranging for visitors, investors, specialized employees. We help you get them here easier, quicker, and in a good way. So quickly at the VAT, what I just said about the deferment scheme that we have. VAT amounts can differ in different countries. In the Netherlands, you can apply for an Article 23 license when you have a Dutch entity or the Dutch VAT number, actually. Meaning that you can defer those VAT payments to a balance sheet and you don't have to pay it right away, giving you a cash flow advantage of about 20%, which you don't have to wait for in about 6 months, asking back for it. Also, the Netherlands is unique in the fact that you can apply it to the whole of Europe. So also when you sell your goods in Germany, for example, where there might be a different VAT rate, you can still all arrange it on that one balance sheet. So it saves you a lot of administrative hassle. And another one is that you can use bonded warehousing and special customs procedures. So you don't have to customs clear the goods. You can put it in bond, and then if you want to export it out of the EU again, do it on the T1, so you don't have to pay your import duties, for example, double, or pay double for customs clearance charges, etc. So why the Netherlands, and why it is a great place to start your European expansion? We are centrally located in Europe, and we've got a strong position in international trade. We've been a trading nation for hundreds of years, as you may know, and that is really bound into our DNA. So we've got a world-class infrastructure with excellent connectivity to Europe and beyond. Our logistics sector is very strong and empowered by innovation and collaboration between multiple organizations. And we've got an open and global business environment. It always ranks among the top of the world. Some unique selling points, just look at it. I would pinpoint a couple, like we are the #1 entry point in Europe for overseas products. Within a 1,000-kilometer radius, you can reach 250 million consumers, or in 1 to 2 business days. We've got the 3 main ports. Rotterdam is the main hub in Europe. And we've got a really strong logistics sector. We are very high quality and competitive in cost for labor, real estate, transportation, and everything else. You can see it on the screen. To boost this a little bit, being a trading nation, you can see that the Netherlands is the second largest importing destination in Europe and the second largest exporter. Through the port of Rotterdam, we are the #1 entry point. So the products are mostly agri-food, high-tech, med-tech, lifestyle, chemicals, foods and drinks. And if you look at value per capita, we are 4.5 times bigger in exports or in imports, sorry, and exports within the EU per capita more than 3 times as much as the #2, Germany. Another visual of our infrastructure. So you see the port of Rotterdam, Schiphol Airport, a little bit in the midst of the Netherlands. But we also have Port of Moerdijk, other inland terminals. We've got good proximity to the integrator hubs, so DHL, FedEx, TNT, etc. And an extensive network of multimodal connections to the European hinterland. So a lot of rivers flowing through the Netherlands. We've got a lot of connections by rail, inland waterways, short sea shipping, and of course road, one of the main parts. No surprise that 40% of the Dutch GDP and 9% of all professional workers in the Netherlands work in or with logistics, which is a major driver for innovation and key and hence to move to a circular economy. And one of the strong things that we have here is the collaboration between institutes, so knowledge institutes, government and commercial companies, which we call the triple helix approach. So everyone is working together to be better. So working together instead of only being in competition with each other. Well, the final slide, a little summary of everything, why we have such a favorable business climate, the VAT deferment, but we also have a pro-business attitude of customs. You can really go into talks with customs to see how they can help you make things easier. Clear rules. Almost everyone in the Netherlands can use a computer. You can appoint a fiscal representative to apply for your VAT number and arrange everything for you, so you don't have to set up shop or have your own entity right away if you start doing business here in Europe. And almost everyone in the Netherlands speaks English. We've got the highest English proficiency in the world. See my contact information here as well, and we can schedule a meeting free of charge and fully confidential to see where we can help you set up your European supply chains. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Justin. So I'd like to invite Eric de Bie up for the next portion.
Good morning, good afternoon. Nice to meet you. My name is Eric de Bie. I'm with Greenberg Traurig. I'm a lawyer and attorney in the Netherlands, and I specialize in trade, customs and VAT and in regulatory compliance. I've started my career with Dutch Customs, that's a long time ago, and for more than 25 years now I'm working with companies from all over the world who are setting up in Europe, in the European Union, and who are distributing goods throughout the European Union. Things have changed over time. We had Brexit, so the UK left the EU. We have the EU expanding at the other, from Eastern Europe, for example. We have different cooperation between and developing cooperation between, for example, Switzerland and the EU. So things are constantly changing in global trade, and we are seeing that also with our clients. But I think things are more hectic for maybe the last 1 or 2 years now, and maybe since the war in Ukraine, things are more hectic for, let's say, 4 years now. What we do, we advise companies, as I told you. So, for example, to give you a few examples, we recently advised a company, a toy company, selling their products in about 12 Eastern Europe and Balkan countries, and they had to deal with the compliance rules in EU countries, but also in non-EU countries, what to put on the label on the toy, and what can be, which language can it be, what are the local requirements, things like that. We're also working with a company that is self-disclosing non-compliance and a potential underpayment of duties because they were exporting from Mexico. They thought they qualify for preferential origin Mexico, and at a certain moment in time they found out they do not qualify for preferential origin, and they decided to disclose to customs authorities and make a voluntarily payment in order to avoid duties, to avoid penalties. What I will do, I will provide a kind of high-level picture, so it has a lot of information probably on the slides. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me or through the Canadian Embassy or through HIDC. Maybe what I sometimes tell sounds maybe a little bit more, let's put it negative or very detailed or stuff like that. But my main message is it's important to comply. The rules are not always easy, but if you set up properly and you prepare properly, it's not that complicated to do business in Europe. But we'll get to that in a minute. Maybe first to start with global trade. I do not have to tell you about tariffs and developments in the US. Hey, you have seen them more closely than we are doing that in Europe, I think. There's an increased duty burden in the US. You have constant rumors and news, etc. Court decisions recently, potential refund of duties in the US, but also on the other hand, we are seeing movements in the EU for the European Commission to decide on coming up with countermeasures against more imports into the US, into the EU, for example, from China, because Chinese companies are moving from exporting to the US and they are now exporting to the EU. But also countermeasures in order to protect the EU market against the US and also to fight with the US if necessary. So there's a lot of tension, a lot of trouble going on, also because of the war in Ukraine and now in Iran, the Middle East. It's of course also having an impact on global trade. So it's a big challenge for businesses, how to do business internationally and how to deal with compliance. But there's maybe some good news, and to reconfirm that all the measures the EU is considering and all the tension that's in place, that's not focusing on Canada, not at all, to be honest. Because what the EU is, for example, considering is tariffs, more tariffs on imported goods, but that's not for Canadian goods. It's more for US goods and Chinese goods. What we are seeing is that the EU and Canada are very well cooperating, and CETA and the Canadian EU trade is, as I mentioned on the slide, is a bastion of calm and stability. This is not a turbulent time for the trade between Canada and the EU, and it's getting more and more easy to do business as a Canadian company in the EU. So what we see, thanks to CETA and the developments in the CETA arrangements between the Canada and the EU, and that's still ongoing, we see that in practice for most of the goods, doesn't matter too much whether you produce and manufacture and distribute from Germany, for example, from the Netherlands, or from Canada. The origin of the product, the Canadian origin, does not have a negative impact at all in EU. It's very easy these days to do business as a Canadian company because of CETA and because of the ongoing cooperation between Canada and the EU. There are a few exceptions, especially in the food, agricultural products, and there are some, for example, with cars, there are some quota arrangements, and but for 98%, as Justin mentioned, it's more or less fully free trade. And we will talk about VAT in a minute, but VAT is not having an impact only on products from outside the EU, it's also having an impact on products produced in the EU. Doesn't matter too much. One remark about CETA and the compliance, it is key to be fully compliant with CETA and to qualify for preferential Canadian origin in order to benefit from CETA. So you do not claim zero rate under CETA if the products are not of Canadian origin. So a few examples you have on this slide. If you have meat or fruits or nuts that are sold from Canada and shipped to the EU, the product does not qualify if let's say the basic products, so all the nuts, all the fruit or the cattle, if we're talking about beef, if they are not wholly obtained, so born and grown in Canada. If that's not the case, the end product can also not be of Canadian origin. If you talk about beer, all the ingredients should be of a different HS heading than 2203. So there should be no intermediate product, for example, that qualifies under 2303. That comes from the US, for example, because then the end product does not qualify for Canadian origin. And with cars, for example, there cannot be a non-Canadian origin of more than 50%. These are only some examples. The rules are very complex in preferential origin, so it's important to make sure you qualify for preferential origin. Then all the benefits are available. If not, and if you do not comply, for example, then you may end up in the situation that customs come in after 2 or 3 years and they assess you for underpaid duties because the products do not qualify. The proof of origin is very important and should be provided and made available for the EU customs authorities. Some developments in the EU. And maybe first, as Justin already mentioned, we have one EU is a single market, is a customs union. We have a lot of European legislation, and this legislation is put in regulations, and the regulations are directly binding in the countries. So they should be, in principle, the same all over the EU. For example, that applies to the European the Union Customs Code. In other areas, for example VAT, but also some regulatory legislation, there is a basic framework, and that applies all over the EU, but there can be differences in the EU member states. I will get to that later on. And so then there's a kind of degree of discretion, and then you can have differences. Overall, the EU regulations, so the direct applicable law, is getting more and more important, and the discretion, so the option for the member states to have exclusions or have a different and own domestic provision, that opportunity is decreasing, so to speak. What does a single market mean? There's one single tariff for all the goods imported into the EU. So if you qualify for zero rate in Italy, you also qualify for zero rate in the Netherlands. There's a consistent application of the rules, of the EU rules. And as already mentioned, we have free trade of goods within the EU. And so you can ship goods, your customs clear in the Netherlands, you can ship it to Italy, to Germany, whatever you want. You can keep them in stock forever. After the first entrance into the EU, there's no customs involvement anymore. And that also applies to the checks at the external border, for example, food and safety and human health checks, etc. If you import a container of beef from Canada into Rotterdam, the beef is checked before it enters the EU. But if it once checked in Rotterdam, you can ship it to Italy, and there's no additional check from a health and from a veterinary perspective anymore. And that's the remark from a legal perspective and from compliance perspective. In practice, there are some differences between the member states because of the attitude and because of local approach also by customs broker and forwarding companies and other partners in the chain. So there can be differences between the member states, but you do see that there is more and more impact and influence from the EU, from Brussels as we call it. There's a lot of free trade agreements. How we have talked about the CETA, but also we have free trade with the UK after Brexit. We have the Mercosur agreement that will probably apply as of May. That's with Argentina, Brazil, and some other southern American countries. We have an agreement with Australia that is going and that's still under discussion, but that's going very well. And we have an agreement, a free trade agreement with the Mediterranean countries, Egypt, Morocco, etc. That's also good to keep that in mind. So it's not only about CETA, but also other free trade agreements. This is important also for companies sourcing to produce in the EU or in Canada. And so, for example, a company in the EU can source products from Canada that is imported free of charge because of the CETA, and so there are no duties that are applicable. You can have production in the EU, and then the end product in the EU can maybe qualify under for preferential EU origin under the EU Mediterranean agreement. So you can have a full supply chain from Canada as maybe a raw material or components to the EU that's free of charge because of free of duties because of CETA, and then the onward supply after production, so added value in the EU, that can also be free of duties. So that's important to keep that in mind, and can be very important for companies sourcing components or raw materials. What we're also seeing is that there are more and more anti-dumping duty and anti-subsidy investigations and levies imposed in the EU. That is specifically targeting production mainly from Asia, and the main target in practice is China, products from China. We have anti-dumping duties on bicycles, on electric cars, but also a lot in the metal and in the chemical industry. In principle, there can also be anti-dumping duties on products from Canada, but in practice that's so far not happening. And it's only happening in case there's some interference by the government, there's some subsidy, and that products are sold under the actual production cost. And so far that's not happening, but it's having an impact on the global trade. And we see that especially Chinese companies are looking for different destinations for their products because they are seeing more and more anti-dumping duties in the EU. And what I mentioned here, that is, if you have a product coming from China to Canada, there's no added value in Canada, so the product does not qualify for Canadian origin, then it's still of Chinese origin when it arrives in the EU, and then it's subject to anti-dumping duties if this apply to the product. A few developments in the EU, recent developments because of the EU Green Deal. That is, first, as we call it, CBAM. There's an additional levy on carbon emission. And so when you import certain products like cement or iron or steel that's coming from outside the EU, then there's deemed that there was carbon emission during production. In the EU, companies must pay and have levies for carbon emission. So what the EU is doing is to put products coming from outside the EU at the same level of carbon emission pricing. That's in place for a few years now, but the actual pricing and the levying, that started as of the 1st of January 2026. This is having an impact. It's now targeting a few product groups, as it's mentioned, and products in scope are listed in the EU legislation, but it's likely that more and more products will be on the list. So it's relevant to coordinate with supplier from Canada and the customer in the EU who is going to deal with the CBAM burden, who is going to pay for it, who is going to register, and who's going to take care of the compliance obligations. A similar scheme, it's not pricing, but it's additional compliance obligations. That's the so-called EU deforestation regulation, and that is targeting, and that's basically a fight against the deforestation that is happening globally. And so what you need to prove at import, if you import coffee or palm oil or rubber, that your product did not cause illegal deforestation. However, this legislation was meant to be implemented and applied as of the 1st of 2005 or December 2024, I think. It's now postponed 2 times because there's a lot of discussion also between businesses in the EU, because this is going to cause a lot of additional compliance work. It's not easy to demonstrate that import that your product did not cause any deforestation if you import from, for example, a non-affiliated Brazilian supplier. Then another thing is the impact of the war in Ukraine. Products are not allowed to be shipped, or a lot of products are not allowed to be shipped from the EU to Russia. So if you are supplying products from Canada and the goods are kept in stock in the Dutch warehouse facility, it's in principle, if products are on the list, and I don't know the exact percentage, but I think maybe 75 or 80% of the products, of all the HS codes are on the list not to be allowed to be exported to Russia. Then in that case, if you are not allowed to export, it's also important that your products are not exported to Russia. So you have an obligation. The EU rules are also applicable to you if you are shipping goods from a warehouse in the Netherlands to Russia. And also it's important, I think, to make sure that your customers are compliant, because you do not want to end up your components to end up in a drone in Russia, because that's not, and we call that reputational damage, and that's having a huge impact. Could have a huge impact on companies. Then about value added tax, the VAT, as Justin talked about. I always start about VAT is that at the end of the day, VAT is not a cost. If you comply, if you do your business right, and you have record keeping, etc. in place, at the end of the day, VAT is not a cost, because any VAT that you pay can be reclaimed. So that's, I think, very important. So you do not have to worry about VAT. You only have to organize your compliance. The Netherlands has implemented a good system, as Justin already mentioned, and that if you customs clear products in the Netherlands, you do not pay VAT, and all the onward supplies for B2B, so to businesses, are not subject to VAT. For B2C, it's a little bit different, but all the VAT that you need to pay to the government can be collected from your customers. I have to hurry up a little bit because my time is almost over. One remark I want to make is about product labeling. We have a lot of questions from companies. They are selling in the EU and they do not know what to put on the label. It's not easy. It's complicated legislation, but it's important and strongly recommendable to comply, because otherwise you will have trouble with your competitors. Do not put Canadian origin on the label if it's not from Canada, and you have. And maybe a remark that origin on the CETA is a little bit different than origin for labeling. At the end of the day, most instances it's the same, but it can be different. But it's important to pay attention to it, to comply, to put CE marking on the label. For toys, you have different labeling requirements. For food, you have to put the name of the importer on the label, stuff like that. So pay attention to it and make sure that you comply in order to avoid all kind of trouble when you are in business in the EU. My 2 last slides. One is about the advantages of the Netherlands. What are the benefits? So about taxation in the Netherlands, I think that's very well. Also direct, so corporate income tax, that's very well organized and very beneficial to Canadian companies. I'm a lawyer, so I always see the dark side of life, you may think, but always think about contracting. If you appoint a distributor, when you appoint them, you are friends and you want to do business together, that may change at a certain moment in time. Contracting in the Netherlands can be in English, can be under Canadian law, can be under Dutch law, but what is very beneficial for many companies doing international business is that we have a commercial court, the Netherlands Commercial Court. You can solve your disputes with your business partners in English. So you do not have to translate all your contracts. You can talk, you can all the communication can be in English. It can be very helpful. And of course, you want to try to avoid disputes and litigation outside. So, two last remarks. When you start doing business, think about the Incoterms you're going to apply. Who is responsible for the import into the EU? Who is responsible for distribution? Who's going to pay for the duties? Who is, etc. That is very important. If you sell X-Works in Canada, your customer has to do everything in Europe. If you sell DDP, so duties paid, you as a Canadian company, you have to take care of the customs clearance, to pay the duties, but also have to deal with all kind of regulatory compliance. And appoint the good customs agent, fiscal representative, and in case of doubts, do not guess, but make sure that you have the proper advice from, for example, the people here at the Canadian, at the embassy here, we are talking about with HIDC, but make sure, and if necessary, you can consult with the authorities to avoid any future disputes. That's the best approach, I think. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you, Eric.
Okay.
I'd like to turn it over now to Stephanie Kurana, who's joining us online from Canada. Stephanie, over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie. I'm the president of Netchem, and I'm going to take you through our experience entering the EU market and sort of how the government and nonprofit organizations you've heard from today were really integral to that experience. Okay. So I'm not here to tell you all about Netchem, but I do want to give a little bit of background as it's going to make things a little bit more concrete. Netchem is a specialty chemical distributor, specifically import and resale. We actually don't manufacture Canadian goods. We've been doing business since 1991, primarily North America, with a large portion of our business in the US. Our business has several different elements. The elements that were most relevant to consider when setting up in the EU, and that would be most relevant to others, would be sourcing and supply chain. So specifically on the ground logistics, and then the regulatory expertise regarding the importation, use, and distribution of chemicals, or in your case, the importation, use, and distribution of whatever it is you are importing and selling. We serve a variety of industries in the fine ingredients and industrial additive market. And we felt that we could replicate this success in Europe, starting with our large global clients. So we had this big idea. It was, sitting on a strategic plan piece of paper back in 2024. That sort of with the products that we supply, our capacity for growth in Canada is somewhat capped, and we wanted to expand maybe into the EU. But what happened is, the impact of geopolitics on the US market in the first few months of 2025, it really gave us the push that we needed to start making an EU venture a reality. So this was me once we said, let's get serious about Europe. Great. Now what? I considered a number of things in the early days. I think it is very important to evaluate the different pros and cons of different entry strategies. I saw some questions kind of around that about finding a local partner. Do you want to incorporate, do a joint venture, purchase someone who is already there? There are a lot of options. Speaking with others was extremely helpful in this regard, and I would recommend that you speak to as many other business owners as possible who have set up in Europe in different forms. One thing I do recommend is to think about, what does ultimate success look like to you? It might weigh in on how you want to enter. One method might seem easier up front. For example, for us, we could have made an early go of things as a non-resident importer, but because of where we ultimately wanted to end up, we opted to incorporate based on where we see ourselves if we're successful. I think this has been covered very well in other talks, but it is a different regulatory environment, particularly depending on what industry you're in. And there are going to be a number of extra things to consider, even down to labels, country-specific invoicing requirements, things like that. I do think working with nonprofit partner organizations as your guide will help you catch some of these things early on and in the planning stage, without great expense to yourself. So I would say that if you are thinking about going to Europe, you probably have more resources than you think. I strongly recommend you reach out to everybody. Go ahead and ask around. So this was the first thing I did. I just spoke with anyone I could find. I contacted my bank, I contacted my accountant, I contacted anyone else I could think of, and just asked for an introduction if they knew anybody with experience doing business in Europe. I call this learning the cheap way versus learning the hard way, and I recommend it. So I ended up having a conversation with actually a German gentleman who had opened his own manufacturing facilities across the world. Our accountant did the accounting for his Canadian facility. And I also spoke to a Canadian manufacturer who had entered Europe through a model of master distribution, and had actually attempted and then discontinued an attempt to set up directly because it did not work well for their business. This was very helpful in clarifying my thinking. And again, it really highlights the importance of figuring out how are you going to do this. So the Trade Commissioner Service was just on my list of sort of due diligence people to contact, but the Toronto office absolutely blew me away. My experience with them was fantastic. Bill Macaraz from the Toronto office in particular was so knowledgeable, and they were a great jumping off point. One thing is, you know, I also get a thrill when I see like Canadian produce in foreign lands. Like I saw Ontario carrots in Aruba a few weeks ago, and I was so excited. But a lot of Canadian programs are geared towards people exporting Canadian goods. That's really good news for you if you're on this webinar and you export Canadian goods. But it can be tricky if you are not that type of company, or you're a service company or anything else like that. But TCS, you know, is fairly agnostic in being there to just help Canadian businesses. So they're a really fantastic resource no matter what type of business you have. So they were my referral point to a number of other programs. They actually introduced us to the NFIA, the Netherlands Foreign Investment Agency here in Toronto. Sjoerd took the time to really listen to us and determine what Netchem would need. We were referred to 4 different potential registered agent partners who would suit our needs as our on-the-ground partner. And then they were the ones who actually referred us to the Holland Distribution League, or Netherlands NDL, who's here today. So how did we then work with the HIDC? We had an initial meeting. We actually had our initial meeting with Justin, who you heard from earlier today. They really took the time to understand our needs. They did an extremely detailed client intake. There actually was a second meeting I didn't reference in between here. But next was referrals. Netchem was able to speak with 4 different logistics partners who would suit our needs. And then we selected a final partner. So this is just like a bit of a recap about things you might want to think about. Let the nonprofit organizations help you and refer you to partners. Do take your time, you know, interview at least 3 people. If you're talking about who's going to be your registered agent, who's going to be responsible for doing all your filings, you're going to want someone that you feel is a good fit for you. And also ask for referrals elsewhere. For example, I did get a referral from my local accounting firm to a local Dutch firm through their global group to determine, you know, maybe if we want to do that piece separately, and interviewed them as well. Obviously, you're going to want to do some sort of financial planning exercise. Again, the nonprofits can really help in this regard because they've seen many other businesses come through and can give you an idea of like, yeah, you know, this might cost this much, and have you thought about that, etc. And time. Didn't write this down on the slide, but give yourself time. It will take time to do the paperwork and all the compliance processes, and set yourself up a bank account with a European bank, etc. So where we started this story, what happened to her? What happened to me? You already guessed because they invited me to talk today. We did get set up in Europe. So we incorporated Netchem BV in September in Utrecht. This is our 2025 timeline. In January, we basically had a plan on a page, and we hadn't done anything. We hadn't done anything about this. In April, after the number of tariff announcements in March and April, we got very serious about investigating. In May, I sat down with the Trade Commissioner's Office, and that really accelerated the process. By September, we were incorporated, and we're currently interviewing for our first hire a year ahead of schedule. So in short, taking advantage of the partnerships and resources you have available will help you accelerate your process. It helped us a lot. And I'd like to sincerely thank the Trade Commissioner Service and the HIDC for helping us make this happen and for inviting me today.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Stephanie. I'd like to thank our speakers, Justin, Eric, and Stephanie, for joining us today and giving such in-depth presentations. I hope everyone found it useful. So with that, I'd like to close it and thank you once again for spending this time with us.